one.
Welcome to Rock Center Shorts. My name is Mike Callahan, professor of the practice of law and executive director of the Rock Center for Corporate Governance here at Stanford Law School. And I'm delighted to be joined today by James White and Krista White to discuss their new book, Anti-Racist Leadership: How to Transform Corporate Culture in a Race-Conscious World. Krista White is a writer and consultant in the DEI space, focusing on work at the intersection of race and queerness. She is the founder and CEO of Kiki the App and the co-founder of Culture Design Lab, two DEI-focused startups. Krista is a graduate of Columbia and has studied film at the India Study Abroad Center, writing at the Paris American Academy, user experience design at the General Assembly, and web development at She Codes. Welcome, Krista. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much for having me. Happy to be here.
James White is a transformational leader with more than 30 years of experience as a CEO, operating executive, and board member. James was chair, president, and CEO of Jamba Juice from 2008 to 2016. And during this time, he transformed the company's DEI practices, resulting in a 500% increase in the company's market cap. He has also held senior executive positions at Safeway, Gillette, and Nestle Purina. James is a boardroom veteran, having served on more than 15 public and private boards, and he currently chairs the board of The Honest Company, is the lead independent director of Affirm, is executive chair of the startup Air Protein, and a board member at Bay Club Company, Schnuck Markets, and Simply Good Foods Company. Welcome, James. Thanks so much for being with us at the Rock Center today. It's great to have you with us.
Mike, good to see you again, and we really appreciate you having us on today.
Well, I'm excited because this topic is obviously so important in corporate America and in our society, and really globally at this point. And so I'd love to get started with a general question of, why did you guys choose to write the book now?
I think for us, and this goes back about 3 years, I was working with one of the boards that I sat on and had a project assigned by the CEO and the board to help them think more comprehensively about their DEI practices. And I invited Krista into the project, and we learned that we had a mutual passion around this work. We subsequently went on to do several other projects, and then we looked at each other and said, we probably have a unique perspective. One, me as CEO and experienced board member talking about this important topic, and then just the intergenerational kind of passions and different perspectives that we gathered kind of working together on the specific project. And really, as I said, the rest is history. The book was shaped by the combination of the pandemic and the global racial reckoning in 2020. And Krista was really a critical component to the writing and shaping of this book.
Great. Krista, could you say a little bit about what it's like to write the book together and why that was important, bringing all the different perspectives?
Yeah, it was an amazing experience writing the book together. It was a great bonding experience too, working with my dad. We live on opposite coasts, and during the pandemic especially, we've not had as much opportunities to see each other in person. So it was just incredible from that perspective. And it was also really fantastic to learn new things about my dad and about his career that he hadn't necessarily talked about in the past, just through the writing of this book and interviewing him and interviewing people he's worked with who all have such amazing stories to share about their time working with him from a variety of different perspectives. So that it's just been an incredible journey.
And James, you mentioned intergenerational views, and I think that's an important component of this dialogue about leadership and perhaps race-conscious leadership, anti-racist leadership. Could you say a little more about why that perspective was important to bring to this dialogue?
I think for us, as we think about the moment that we sit in and kind of the future of work, and we're talking about the great resignation in boardrooms, I think the reality we all face as leaders, both in the boardrooms and running companies, is that you have a next generation of employees, associates, and consumers that are holding us accountable very differently. And I think Krista's voice and perspective and her experience and even her expectations were really instrumental to the way we shape the book, the topics that we covered, and really the focus of the book. One of the things that Krista talks about is intersectionality, and maybe she can comment on that, but that was really an important thing that we spent time on, given her push.
Yeah, Krista, could you share more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Intersectionality is something that has always been important to me as someone who sits at multiple identities. But as we started doing our work few years ago now, consulting with these companies and doing research around DEI, that's something that really came up to the surface was the importance of, for example, disaggregating your data. You might have data on, on women or on people of color, on Black folks, but you need to look at women of color as well, because we have a different experience than men of color or white women. So that's just one example that always is very salient for me. And I think even in the way we use language is something that needs to be considered. A lot of the ways we talk about diversity is about women and minorities is the language that's the standard language. And there's not really a term that's all encompassing, that's necessarily inclusive yet, but I think that's something that we can continue to look at.
That's terrific. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I think that's an important part of the dialogue. And James, your point on in leadership, thinking about that next generation of leaders and understanding perspectives, it makes this book really unique. And you mentioned, Krista, the experiences that your dad has had and how you enjoyed learning about those. As a reader of the book, I did too. And in fact, I think the style was great in terms of sharing the anecdotes, James, from your leadership experience, and then the checklists at the end of the chapters, like to give practical guidance. And I wanted to turn to the practical side a little bit for our audience at the Rock Center of CEOs and board members. And as you note in the book, one of the challenges CEOs are facing is how to get started now on building the right culture. And so could you share what are sort of three or four key takeaways for CEOs to get moving?
Yeah, I think the main thing that we would be recommending is really start where you are. One thing that is often a challenge for us as CEOs and leaders is admitting what we don't know. And I think the best leaders that I've seen pursue this work and really move their organizations forward, they take themselves on a learning journey with their management teams and leadership, and they start by really just auditing where they are. What are the practices? What are the processes inside the company? And with a critical eye, they try to find systems, processes, rituals that maybe disadvantage or are biased to one part of the population, and they try to clean those up as they go. But they also take themselves on a listening and kind of learning tour across their organizations to have that inform the actions that they take. So a couple really specific points that I'd make. One is you can't separate anti-racist leadership and the work in and around DEI from culture. Therefore, the CEO, she can't delegate that work. So the CEO has to be actively engaged in the work. So that would be point one. The second point is the way to make this work sustainable inside a company is typically in the middle management of the organization, because that's how most of us experience our respective companies, is through our immediate supervisors, which are typically in the middle management of the company. So the most sustainable way to make change is going to be by educating and delivering tools to the middle management of the organization. And then really the final point is everything in business is important. We measure it, and then we connect it in some way to the way we incentivize folks.
That's terrific. Thank you. Yeah, that point of middle management really jumped out at me in the book. And then also your point in the book about not just dealing with how people are promoted, but also distribution of work and assignments and projects and visibility for people at all levels to be able to be part of that going forward is something that I thought really insightful and not something I've heard before. And I want to turn to one other point, which is, as you know, since you've been on so many corporate boards and been a longtime CEO, boards sometimes struggle with the line between oversight and management. And what is different about how boards should guide their companies through this journey towards anti-racist leadership? And what are some of your key takeaways for boards in this dialogue?
Yeah, I think we moved to a place, Michael, and again, you guys specialize in this work and do this work better than almost anybody globally that I'm aware of. This is one where the board has to be actively engaged, and I'll share a couple examples. As we look at the focus around ESG, especially the S in ESG that our investors and other stakeholders are holding us accountable to, the board has to be actively involved in oversight. As an example, I sit on one board where we've established an ESG committee, a separate standalone committee, because it's such an important topic. It cuts across every single committee in the boardroom, but we've got an ESG committee in one of the boards that I sit on. I sat on another board last year where we appointed a executive vice president of ESG because this was such a important area for us to have leadership around and oversight of. And the one final anecdote that I'd share is, for me as a board member, different than any time in my history, starting in 2020, I've got at least 3 boards where I visit with the CEO, the CHRO, where we have chief diversity officers and key leaders on a monthly basis around the topic of DEI.
Oh, wow.
Which is a change in the boardroom. And some might consider that being a little bit more on the field. But I think where there is resident knowledge and capabilities, you've got leaders in management that are asking their board members to participate in different ways. And I've got 3 boards that I'm actively involved on a routine basis with those companies on this topic. And we've been at it for over 18, almost 24 months.
Wow. Yeah, that insight into more active engagement and your point about, meeting with the people who are actually driving this on a monthly basis, I do think that would be a change for some boards and probably an important one as we think about different perspectives on this dialogue. And Krista, your point on both intersectionality, but also the intergenerational guidance, that there's much more pressure and awareness that boards sort of need to do more work, James, to your point, to get more on the field and really make change here and try to drive it. Terrific. Well, I want to thank both of you for joining us today at the Rock Center. To our audience, I would recommend picking up this book. It's a terrific read and terrific guidance and a unique perspective that I think is super valuable to the dialogue. And we're so grateful for you spending time with us today, James and Krista.
Thank you for having us.
Have a great day.
Thank you very much. You too.